We have the privilege of talking to Dr. Pat McCarthy. Dr. Pat is from Missoula, Montana. He is in internal medicine. I've had several guys say that after knowing Pat in the Army and in the Air Force, as to whether or not they would want him as a doctor. Now, we'll get into this during the interview. Dr. Pat was a B-24 pilot during the Second War. One of his favorite planes, I believe, was called the P-Bar. Dr. Pat was shot down over France on one of his missions. And we're just going to visit here just for a minute, Pat, with what actually went on over there. And I understand that when you were shot down, that it took you a while to get back. Can you tell us what happened when you hit the ground and whatnot?
Well, I was shot down in northern France, not too far actually, from Luxembourg in a town, in a village that is notorious. It was Charlemagne's capital, which happened to be the capital of the world in 1033. At that time I didn't know this. I revisited it. And fortunately, actually a Belgian took me to a priest there who equipped me with some clothes and a pair of shoes that were about 3 sizes too big, so I had to stuff them with mud and straw. But then they gave me 3 big chunks of bread and a bottle for water, and I started down toward France, and then to go over to Normandy, because I knew that Normandy had been established, but I was it had just barely gotten started. So in my long trek, about 370 kilometers, around Paris and back to Normandy, I was kind of with the German army. They were also moving out, von Rundstedt and Rommel and company, into position to take on Patton and the Canadians and the British as they were staged around Cherbourg.
How long were you between the time you were shot down and when you got back to your outfit?
I was about, by the time J.D. Long came down and identified me, which they insisted on doing, I guess, and that was a good idea, about 90 days, somewhat under 90, but very close.
Did you ever have an occasion when you thought maybe the Germans had discovered you? And
Oh, they had discovered me several times, but with little tricks and walking. When you approach Paris, there are many fences that come in like this that you don't notice, but you find yourself kind of in a funnel with a railroad track and a road and some other things where they do checking stations. So I kind of got rocks in my shoes and crossed the road and then walked back out of those. Had to swim a couple of rivers to get around them.
Well, did you try to make people believe that you might have been a Frenchman rather than an American?
Not initially. When I got into Normandy, which was really 250, 300 kilometers down the road, and by the way, 20 pounds lighter and having a hell of a time, because I was living on green apples and wheat, and the green apples were about that big around, and the wheat, you know, over in France, they don't do like we do in Montana. They don't harvest it all and put it in the bin. They leave the heads in and harvest it as they need it.
Right.
They shock it, big shock. So I'd reach in there and get a handful of wheat and had puffed wheat.
Yeah.
Kept body and soul together, but I lost a lot of weight. So that's kind of how that went.
Well, I know the story that everybody's going to find interesting, and I want you to tell us about your experience with the P-38. This has to be a little bit unusual.
Well, yes, it's very unusual. Most of us in the Bomber Command didn't have access, and many of us would have loved it, to fighters. But it so happens that Colonel Zemke, an outstanding 8th Air Force ace and commanding officer, was in charge of the 56 fighter group, and I flew 47s down there, and then was transferred to the 479th, which was a P-38 outfit, and which he was reorganizing because they had terrible losses. So Jay Otis and I, Jay Otis, a kid from South Dakota, and my home's Montana, so we were kind of naturally attracted to one another, maybe a little Tex bad boy stuff too, but we went down, checked out a couple, and slow timed them for them. They also needed a lot of help with their maintenance thing, so We were flying around, and we buzzed Wendling in a kind of a gentle sort of way, and it was just before noon, about 5 minutes to 12. And there were some British Lancasters on our dead runway. And I could see everybody getting out looking for a good buzz job. So we went down through there again, and while I was shot down in France, they'd put in a new power pole just on the other side of the club. When I came through this slot that I'd been through before with a P-47, all of a sudden, here's a pole right in front of me. I reefed back on the wheel, got a speed stall, but I had the attitude right. The hit right under the pilot's nacelle, no aileron, no rudder, no nothing. Took out the tail boom, thank God, and I pushed the engines up, and it climbed out to somewhere between 300 and 400 feet, and I just pulled the top, pulled the side, and as soon as it started to tip one way or the other, out I went. And I swung once, and came back and went right on my butt and rolled all over the ground.
You couldn't have had the chute open or anything.
Oh, yeah, it did.
Oh,
The
you
chute
did?
opened behind me.
Oh, behind
See,
you.
I was going over 350 to 400 miles an hour, and it just, boom, right straight out, and just jerked the supreme stuffings out of me. And then I swung through once, and on the way back, bang, hit the ground. Two enlisted men happened to be riding by on their bicycle, and they said, "Geez, are you dead?" I said, "No, I'm not dead." They said, "Let's try to help you up," and I was shaking so hard I could hardly get up. But they lifted me up, and I wasn't hurt at all.
Well, I can see why everybody at the reunion is reminding me of this story.
Well, you see, it was right at lunchtime, so people were kind of on their way to the various and sundry mess halls, and when this one came right in under the treetops and so forth, they all kind of perked up.
You had a good audience.
I had a good audience. Made those old Britishers right outside the Officers Club. We had a bricked up bomb shelter with dirt against it. And they were all standing on this, put that wing right on the edge, and boy, they just went right into it. It was too good. It was a very dumb thing to do. About these people who would question whether this young man was capable of growing up to be a physician. You know, many of us in this Air Force, Air Corps, were very young and not mature. And many of the contacts and many of the experiences in this man's army, as the old-timers used to say, were good for some of us, killed some of us, but were very maturing for others. And with a little bit of time and so forth, medical school and practicing medicine was not an impossibility.
Your experiences made you grow up.
Absolutely. They made you think a little. And it helped.
Dr. Pat, appreciate your being
Thank you
with
very
me.
much, sir.
And hope to see you around the hotel here, and I'm sure that the people who have a chance to see this on tape will enjoy it.
I hope so.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're here again with the 392nd Bomb Group reunion here at Camelot Hotel. We have with us this afternoon Bob Vickers. Bob, let's see, is from Albuquerque, New Mexico. We have Joe Whitaker from Somerset, Pennsylvania. Both these men are known by everybody in the entire reunion. In fact, I've been told if you want anything done, if you want to know anything, or anything like that, that you're to see Bob Vickers. So
I'm not sure about that.
everybody that I've talked to during the reunion, if I want to talk about something that everybody knows about, I talk about Bob Vickers. Bob is the author of a book that I have here with me this morning called The Liberators of Wendling. Now, this is a book that is the total background of the 392nd Bomb Group. Now, we're going to be talking to Bob momentarily about the contents of this book. Of course, the first thing I'd like to ask Bob is what inspired you to do this work in the first place? It must have been something great.
Well, after getting out of the Air Force, I guess I was looking around trying to find myself something to do, and one of the first things that struck me was what's ever been written about the old 392nd Bomb Group World War II? Your memories come flooding back. And quite simply, I thought, you know, I would like to research it for my own benefit or my own peace of mind. And then it became a much bigger thing after people encouraged me to put the put it together and
Now,
look for them.
what are you talking about in the time of research? I'm sure you spent many years in researching this book, didn't you?
Well, not really, and certainly wasn't intended as an Ernest Hemingway effort. Quite honestly, from the time I started research on the book and put the final things together, and certainly got a tremendous amount of assistance from many of the 392nd people I found in correspondence, where Joe helped me get people's names and things, possibly 9 months. We found what we did basically was find out where we should go research and what was available. And it really centered down in two areas, one of which was the U.S. Air Force's National Archives at Montgomery, Alabama, has the museum there, and they have taken all the recorded typewritten pages and put it on microfiche. Regrettably, ours doesn't contain too much history, but it was enough to get names and things, and in the National Archives in Washington, and
Well,
that's the substance of it.
I would assume, since this is considered the Bible of the 392nd reunion and association, has anybody pushed you yet for a sequel?
Well, yes, and I'm flattered deeply, deeply. I know there could be sequels written, maybe centering on things like missing aircrew reports and missing in action, but at this particular time, I don't think that I'm the man. Maybe there's a volunteer out there that I'm the man who should do the sequel. I can tell them where to get the data if they have the time to dig it out.
Well, Joe, now I understand you were one of the original first group of bombardiers. Is this the first group of the 392nd?
I was one of the first 4 operational officers on the original orders that formed the 392nd, and I was the group bombardier, and all through the training and putting together and the taking overseas of the 392nd, which of course was the 4th B-24 Liberator unit heavy to go into combat in World War II in England under the 2nd Air Division, 14th Combat Wing, 2nd Air Division, 8th Air Force.
Well, I understand that you were responsible probably for the training of a lot of the bombardiers in the 392nd. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. We had the privilege of working with fine people, good disciplined crews. We had a great success in bombing during our total time overseas, and the group is distinguished as having one of the finest bombing records of the whole 8th Air Force, and Bob brought this out.
I was hoping Joe would mention that. Actually, in our research, if you don't mind me commenting, Joe,
Bob.
which we certainly wanted to record, of over the 17,000 tons of armament dropped, all types of bombs, and this is documented in the archives of the United States Air Force. The B-24s that we flew in that group put nearly 75%, that's about roughly 72+% bombs within a 2,000-foot circle of the aiming point. And in later years, having been in the Strategic Air Command, I will tell you this, even in combat with the most sophisticated airplane, that is a legendary type accomplishment with the type of equipment we were working with, the weather conditions and the things we did. And in large measure, this is owed to the training that Joe perpetuated in the group.
Well, one of the big factors that when you speak of a Liberator or any heavy bombardment group, you speak of discipline in formations over the target, and we had great discipline and integrity on the part of our command pilots, our lead pilots, the whole group. However, the Liberator bomber, and I speak authoritatively, is a great platform for bombing. The stability is great. We utilized both the Sperry and the Norden bomb site. I bombed out of B-17s, not in combat, but in this country, prior to our being assigned B-24s and switched from 17s over. There will always be this input of questionable between the B-17 and 24s, but the facts are that the B-24 Liberator was a very stable aircraft. It was a bombardier's dream. Yes. We had integrity in the formation, and the bombing was superior.
Well, I understand, and I've felt all during this reunion and being here that this is a time of memories. Every time I get around a group that are huddled together, I see them looking at pictures and talking about old times. I thought maybe you all might tell me just a couple items about when might have been your scariest moment, when you had your fears, of course realizing, of course, that a lot of the boys are talking about it now in a humorous way, but I'm sure back then it became very serious. Why don't you tell me about a couple of those experiences?
I can tell you briefly. I imagine we share with many of the combat crew members, and Joe as well. In my own personal case, there are no heroes. You don't go to war as a hero. You do your mission, and you are dedicated with a group of men who you were just put with and tried to train with in a very short time, and done very well, I might say, by virtue of the group's guidance. You're scared, and I mean scared like a gut scare, well, something knotted in your stomach. But the thing that always occurred to me was, there's 10 other airplanes, 12 other airplanes, and all these contrails, and they're all going that directions, and there's men in those airplanes, 10, 11, 9, just as frightened as we are, but they're trained, they know what they're supposed to be doing, and they go do it. And that's about the way it was. A couple other things, and I'll certainly relate this in my own way. As I look back on it now, taking a heavily loaded over 65,000-pound airplane off a very short runway with the engine screaming like banshees into some of the English weather, as I look back on it now, I'm not even sure I would be up to doing it. That was a gut-wrenching, getting off the ground kind of a deal, and then forming up with 2,000 or 3,000 airplanes in the overcast. The flak was a very, very, it was like a deadly apparition. You'd see it, and you'd say, do you know, I would think of my own self, do you know those people down there are trying to kill you?
Kill me.
And it had a deadly, if you're fascinated by snakes, I'm definitely afraid of it. Flak was like a snake to me. It was so deadly, you still wanted to look at it. I know Joe has a lot more. I just...
Joe, what's one of your scary moments that you recall?
Well, I had a number of scary moments. I think one of the first encounter with actual combat was on the famous diversionary mission that, where the 24s flew and the 17s penetrated, and we pulled the Yellow Belly boys from Abbeville into our group sector, and it was a very successful mission, but an introduction to what those fighters could do, the enemy fighters. And we did not have the fighter protection, of course, that came later in the war. But I'll never forget that first encountering under a fighter attack. The longest mission that the 392nd had was the 2 missions to Norway. The Oslo-Kjeller Aerodrome mission, which was November 16th of '43. Was an interesting one. Quickly, I took over because of the lead aborting at the start of the bomb run, and we were very successful. It was excellent bombing, and we hit them at 12:03 at high noon, and we had no opposition coming in, coming up the Skagerrak. We went up to Scotland and then across the North Sea and then up the Skagerrak. But as we finished everything, made our turn and came back down to Skagerrak, all hell broke loose, and we encountered one of the most difficult fighter attacks early in the war that this group had encountered. We had a very successful mission. I got my first DFC right there. It was a very long mission, but I'll never forget that one.
Yes.
That was a difficult one.
Well, I think it might be interesting to point out right there, as you probably know, the historians say, early part of the war, flak wasn't as formidable because we certainly didn't have command of the airspace. And the German fighter threat was very, very big, and we didn't have any escort fighters. Joe's time and many of the guys before me were in that era where flak was still heavy, but in our time frame, say in the latter part of '44 on to the end of the war, flak and aircraft was the biggest threat because we had commanded the air supremacy of the air. But I will tell you something, the war was going on very well on the last day. The 8th Air Force and the 392nd flew, April the 25th, 1945, because we got our lead airplane shot out. And you could tell that they were still mad at us.
Right. Well, you know, we could sit here all day probably and talk about experiences, but for the sake of time,
the one mission that should be recognized here is the Gotha mission, which was in February of '44, and it was the highlight of the 392nd. They were, of course, awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation Award, and it was a tremendous piece of bombing, absolutely superior. And that was the reason 1 year later we finally got the citation through for the 392nd. I was then the division, well, I was with the 392nd and helped plan that mission. I didn't fly it, but then I became the 14th Combat Wing Bombardier, and then the division, which had all of the B-24s in the whole theater. And I was so happy to finally see that citation go through for the Gotha mission. That was a rough one.
I bet that was a thrill.
Yeah.
But,
Bob brought that out in his book extensively.
we'll have to conclude the interview because of the sake of time. We certainly appreciate you all visiting with us, and I'm sure that the people that purchase the tapes will enjoy this for years to come, even their children and their grandchildren. So we'll wish you a happy reunion and hope that we see you around the hotel.
Thank you very much for taking your time to share with us.
Thank you for taking your...
We're here again at the Camelot Hotel in Tulsa, Oklahoma for the reunion of the 392nd Bomb Group. And we have been graced by three gentlemen that are agreed to an interview with us and talk about old times. I have at my immediate left Harold Shiltnick, also known as the Baron, from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then next to him, J.D. Long, Jesse Long, from Greensboro, North Carolina. And then Al Hershey Hirsch from Cliffside Park, New Jersey. Now this is all the same crew, the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, of the same B-24 that everybody has seen the pictures around here in the hotel, called the Double Trouble. We've asked the gentleman here to just give us an idea of what went on during the war and kind of refresh our memories for everyone in the group that sees these videotapes, what has went on and what did go on during the war. Gentlemen, I'll let you do the talking, and if you can, tell us about some of the missions that you went on.
Well, I think you always remember your first mission and the last mission, at least I do, so I think we should start out talking about our first mission. That we arrived in the 392nd, I think it was about November, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
just about November, early December. And frankly, with virtually no training other than what we had received stateside on the 22nd, December 22nd, we were alerted that we were going to make our first combat mission to Munster, Germany. We really didn't know very much at the time. We had been told that we were going to assemble over a marker beacon.
Yeah, Buncher Beacon 6.
Buncher Beacon 6. And when we took off that day, I recall that we ran into clouds almost immediately, and we climbed through the clouds. And why don't you tell what happened when we tried to assemble?
Well, when we got up there, we couldn't find any of our group around anywhere. And Shilnick here was determined we were going on this mission. Hirsch was trying to tell us on the intercom that he had tripped his parachute, and he had parachute all around him. And we thought he said ripped, and we decided, what's a little tear in a parachute? We're going on anyhow.
Right.
So we tacked on to another group that we saw going out. It was only later that we discovered it was Jimmy Stewart's group, and it was their first mission, too.
Oh. The whole mission was sort of messed up, and just looking at the sortie record that there were 6 aircraft dispatched from the 578, that was our squadron, but only 4 of them ever actually went over the French coast. In other words, the rest of them turned around and went back because they couldn't find the 392nd either.
That's right.
So we flew the entire mission with the 445th. And as our recall that it was clouds all the way. I think that I don't ever recall.
We went over a front.
Yeah, we went over a front, and I can remember when the lead plane dropped its bombs, we dropped our bombs. I didn't see anything.
We
I
didn't know where they were being dropped.
But we had to go so high, we used a tremendous amount of gas. Inexperienced for one thing, and...
But not only that, we got under fighter attack.
yeah,
Remember
we did.
that first fighter attack?
That first fighter.
As a matter of fact, I don't know whether Al ever looked out the window or not on those things, but I was looking out the window because Schilling was flying the airplane at the time, and I thought it looked less like a movie. I saw the fighters attacking this 24 in front of us and peeling down, and about the second pass at him, he peeled slowly out of formation and started down, and then he almost recovered from a spin, and then his right wing broke off and it just went into flames and he disappeared into the clouds, and I thought, man, this is the greatest movie I ever saw. Yeah. Until suddenly I heard our guns going, and when I looked out I saw a fighter shooting at us, and we were shooting back at him, and it was true. It wasn't a film anymore, it was absolutely real, and I've never been so scared in my life, I'll tell you.
For those of us that are not, weren't there, now understand, hey, we're doing the interview here.
It's all right.
And he wasn't on the mission.
You were flying the B-24s, and you were running bombing missions over Germany, am I right?
This was Munster, Germany.
This was our first mission.
And these were fighters that were intercepting you.
Right.
And what type of fighters were they?
FW-190 is what I saw.
Honey, hey,
Yes.
we're television.
We got to put a
Unless
gun.
you want to be a star.
But how many planes were in your formation that day?
18 right there, 15.
Well, I think probably even the 445th, I think was under strength at this time. I don't think all of them got through. My guess is in our particular box that we attached to, that probably we had 4, yeah, that got 4. Only 4 went up, and
Right.
that made the flight on the entire 392nd. And I would say the box that we tacked onto, there might have been 12 to 18 planes.
Yeah,
I'm not really
somewhere, I had the feeling it was 15, but it might have been 12.
sure. Yeah,
We made the 12th one. We tacked on.
Your normal mission, if I remember in reading the book correctly, was somewhere around 5 or 6 hours. Is this correct?
We can tell, you can check.
Well, on this particular mission, that we took off at 10:15 and we landed at 16:15, so it was a 6-hour mission, a total of 6 hours. And unless you made what they call a no-ball attack on some of the rocket installations in France, you virtually always would be over 4 or 5 hours. And if you went to Berlin, of course, you might go to 8 or 9 hours.
The thing that I've noticed since the war, and I've been to some of the museums and looked at some of the B-24s, the thing that I haven't been able to get in my mind is how these guys sat in those gun turrets. Of course, I'm a big man, but they all look too small to me. Look like there ought to be some little bitty kids in there in those gun turrets and whatnot. And they don't fly the full mission in those turrets.
They would get in when you crossed the coast, and they would stay in there until they came back, because once you cross the French coast, and this, of course, was before the invasion, there was always a chance of fighter attack. There were exceptions. In other words, if you didn't, possibly if you didn't have any fighter resistance at all, they might get out earlier. But when all guns had to be fired before you ever got to the coast. And this is one thing you would see as the planes climbed over the North Sea or the Zuider Zee. You would see all the planes in the group firing their guns. In fact, as pilot and co-pilot, we'd see the spent cartridges. They would rattle off your plane from the planes ahead of you. So yes, all guns had to be fired, which means that they had to be in the turret at the time you crossed the coast.
I understand you were shot on one of the missions.
Yeah, and this was my last mission, which was my 27th on April 22nd. This was 1943.
44.
I'm sorry, 44.
44.
Yeah, April 1944.
After you were shot, you were the sole pilot of that plane.
He was the pilot, yeah.
Well, I'll break in here and tell you something that the rest of them don't appreciate better. I was hit in the arm, and I wasn't sure how badly I was hit, and I could feel a little blood running down, but I was afraid if I told them, they'd all bail out on me. So we got somebody up there, I don't know whether it was Al or Patty or somebody, and gave Shilnick a shot of morphine.
2 shots.
Yeah.
Well, big shots of morphine, because he had lost right much blood, and he got to be the happiest character you ever saw in your life. He sang, "Show me the way to go home."
Show me the way
And
to
then
go
he
home.
would come and say, "They can't do this to me. I'll volunteer for another mission. I'll volunteer for another tour," he said. "They can't do this to me." It kind of wore off about the time we got back to England, but he was a happy passenger going home.
And I understand you spent, what, 3 months in the hospital?
Yeah, I was in the, well, we landed after dark in a little fighter base called Hawking, which incidentally had quite a historical significance in the Battle of Britain. That's where the Spitfires flew out of. And they took me to a hospital in southern England, a British hospital, Winchester, and I was operated on that night by a British surgeon, and he said he was very fortunate because I've taken a lot of shrapnel out of a lot of British fighter pilots. And I said, "Well, what hit me?" He said, "Oh, there's no doubt, 20-millimeter cannon fire." So, and I was there about 2 weeks, and then I went to the 82nd General Hospital back in the Central Highlands. I can't tell you just where it was, and was there until, it was either late July or early August, I don't remember. Finally, I went back to my group.
And I can certainly appreciate you guys feel a closeness even to this day with each other's lives in your own hands and flying those missions.
Well,
And I would think that over the years, this friendship hasn't waned any, and maybe has even built to a point of now being able to appreciate what the closeness was and what it was to face death. And of course, this interview could go on for another hour or two, but due to the sake of time and the fact that we will be doing it on videotape, I just feel like we're going to have to close it. We
Sure.
appreciate your doing it for us.
Was that
And we
satisfactory?
certainly hope to see you around.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Was that satisfactory for you?
That's very fine.
Okay. Thank you.
These are a few excerpts from our reunion in Fort Worth honoring the 50th anniversary of the B-24.